Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumburger channel. This is, of course, the show where we dive into all sorts of weird and unusual albums, We look at things that are sometimes, conventional, sometimes unconventional, it's all sorts. And today I think we're looking at something that's both, arguably. This is an album that, arguably it's full of songs, right? Song 1, Song 2, Song 3, they're all tangible songs, no doubt, but they are chaotic, discordant, and they're also horribly ugly and angry. It is phenomenal stuff. I'm hoping this is going to be the first in a series covering this entire band's discography, because I think it'd be really interesting to just look at this band's entire history one by one. So of course, start with the debut, right? We're looking at one of the most infamous experimental rock bands of all times, the phenomenal Swans, and that debut album, Filth. Yep, so this is the episode where we're going to start getting into it. I really want to cover all the Swans albums, and yep, we're just going to start right at the beginning with Filth here. However, let's ask ourselves the question before we get into this album: who are Swans? Well, Swans are an experimental rock band formed in the early 80s by singer-songwriter Michael Gira. And across their entire career, Swans have had a revolving door of members, just coming and going, which has led to this really eclectic musical career that covers, really diverse ranges of genres, On the early stuff, you're sort of covering no-wave and industrial rock kind of things. There's sort of a middle era of gothic rock. And then in the later years, you're sort of getting these really amazing, huge, sprawling post-rock compositions. It's phenomenal stuff. And so, obviously, starting with Filth. So, who are Swans when this was recorded? Well, the lineup at the time featured Michael Gira, the main guy of Swans, on bass and vocals, Norman Westberg on guitar, which is a name we're going to see very often in these Swans episodes. We also had Jonathan Cain and Roly Mosiman on drums, and Harry Crosby on bass guitar as well. And it should be noted, as well as the conventional drum kits, both drummers were also given various equipment, I want to say. They were just given tables to just smash and batter, and it just gives everything this really motoric industrial structure. That's just a completely sonic assault on your ears. Oh, it's amazing. It just pummels you with this brutality, and then you get double drums, double bass, percussion, and it's just really absurdly industrial and motoric, and it just pushes along, boom, 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 kind of thing, I'd say. And over the top of that, Norman Westberg's guitar is just screeching with this unholy, chaotic racket that is just, it's incredible. And then, Gira himself just howling out in such miserable, anguished pain. Oh, it's so good, and I have to say, what a brilliant way to, start off your album career with, a debut like this. It's so ugly, so repugnant, I would say, but it's so interesting and fascinating. It just draws you into this really just, absurdly chaotic, uncomfortable world. Really sludgy, really miserable, trudges along so angrily, and the only respite you're going to get are the brief pauses between the tracks on this thing. So, we're going to go into this thing track by track. The album opens up with Stay Here, a brutal, aggressive track that swings with its repetitive structure that bounces along so angrily and furiously. I love Norman Westberg's guitar on this one. It screeches so sonically, whilst everything else is just pushing along that slow, angry tempo. And it all just feels so brutal, like Gira is howling over the top of this thing, you know, with a sort of what I would describe as a sort of anti-authoritarian dirge, you know, commanding you to be strong, be hard, resist temptation. You know, it's really intimidating to say the least. But it's a perfect opener for this album, though. It just throws us immediately into this dark, foreboding world that Swans want us to occupy. Brutal, pummeling, and this thing is only just getting started. So, track 2, Big Strong Boss. This one, weirdly enough, on the musical side of things, it feels a little bit more conventional than what we've just heard and what we're going to end up hearing. You know, it's got much more frenetic pace as it just pounds along, and it's another one of those tracks that seems to be questioning authority. You know, it's, you know, in particular those who are at the top of the ladder looking down at you and commanding you to work under horrible conditions, which is at least the impression I get. You know, you get lyrics like stupid snake, big strong boss, break my back, blood runs black. And it gives us a sense of someone being forced to work until their whole body is just breaking and falling apart. You know, it's brutal. And I have to mention as well, like, the sudden ending on this track is really peculiar moment. Like the song is just trudging along at its very weird pace, and then it just ends suddenly, kind of like that Sopranos ending. And for me, though, it kind of gives me the impression of someone just suddenly collapsing in the middle of everything, like their body just cannot handle the torment and anguish it's undergoing, and so it just falls and everything ends. I don't know if that's intentional, but it's just what I get from it, and I think it's interesting. And so from there, we move on to another slow sonic assault with the third track, Blackout. And this opens up with this absurdly atmospheric drums and industrial soundscapes before the bass guitar just pummel away with those repetitive chords. No, and lyrically, this one seems to be regarding, you know, drinking, getting drunk, and blacking out through the entire process of it all. And, you know, perhaps attempts to simply, you know, do anything possible to remove oneself from reality, you know, complete disassociation on some level. Like, everything around you is so horrible and ugly, so, you know, you drink to sort of get away from it in a way, perhaps. But what's interesting on this one is the peculiar backing vocal that's behind Gira's main vocals. It's really peculiar because it's so dark and guttural, and it gives me an impression of another side of the character who's, you know, expressing all the sentiments in the song, you know, one who's behind this blackout drunkenness and is pushing this really dark agenda forward, you know. Maybe, I don't know though. And so, you know, as always, move on, we get onto what is probably one of my favourite tracks on this album, you know, the phenomenal Power for Power. And this is one of the longest tracks on Filth, you know, but to be honest, you know, it's long on Filth, 6 minutes long to be exact, roughly, but that is nothing compared to what we're going to be seeing from Swans in the later stuff. Like, you'll know what I mean when we get there eventually. But, you know, like the rest of the album, though, it's this pummeling, noisy, no-wave excursion, you know. One that seems to sum up a lot of the themes on the album, though, of anger, money, sex, power, etc., etc. You know, a commanding tour de force that feels almost anthemic with its calls for power for power. You know, there's such a presence, though, to this track. It's so unrelenting in how it progresses forward with this pounding structure, and it's peculiar because it doesn't really build up in any way, I would say, but rather it just pushes forward like this industrial conveyor belt of unsettling sounds, you know. You get this a lot, like, I feel with Swans, you know. There's no, like, it's boom, 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 just push, 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 you know, and it keeps that momentum going, but it doesn't do much with it. It just keeps that sort of unsettling atmosphere, I think. It's interesting. And so, with this we then arrive to the middle point of the album, though, which is the shortest track on this album, and it's the really unsettling Motoric Freak, which takes just over a minute to pummel us with this sort of post-punk no-wave excursion that sees the band employing the use of tape loops to create this really unsettling atmosphere. And the pacing on this one feels way faster than anything we've previously heard. And there's even this stop right in the middle of everything, and it then just resumes for the final verse. It brings it right back to this noisy freakout. It's an interesting track that sort of acts as like an interlude, I feel, between sides A and B. And yeah, it's very interesting though. It's a very sort of like kind of experience to listen to. And so yeah, progressing forward though, we move on to the B-side now, and we get another filthy aggressive track with Right Wrong. And this one just screeches with uncomfortable bass and guitar. And it's this constant howling refrain of wrong, right, throughout the entire song before Gira goes into this tirade of uncomfortable sexual imagery of sorts. It's one of those tracks that sort of, it's swinging back and forth with its pounding structure, and it's wonderfully aggressive, it helping push that industrial pacing, that we've heard from the album towards what's going to be the ending of the album. But man, lyrically, it's so uncomfortable and unsettling. It's very peculiar and stuff. But that's the whole point, really. That's what they want to do with their music. And this is then followed on by Thank You. It's another no-wave post-punk track that is arguably a little bit more conventional in terms of its structure and pacing, kind of like the other, Big Strong Boss, I think it was. But yeah, it's a bit quicker and a bit faster than the more mechanized industrial style you've gotten so far. It's noisy, distorted mess, and it's very peculiar and visceral imagery throughout that Gira howls out with that guttural growl, of course. And I feel like tracks like this, it helps to break up the album. It's a bit more of an album experience, rather than just having every track have that same sort of, kind of style. You get ones that are a little bit faster, and, I think it just helps to show a bit more diversity in the band. Like, every track on the album contributes to this overall imagery and concept and, very despairing, grim, guttural, visceral imagery and stuff. But it's interesting that, through experimentation, they kind of draw little different things out of it that is a bit subtle, I would say. I don't even know if it's meant to be subtle because it's all so loud and in your face for the most part. I just find that interesting though. And, with Thank You, being towards the end of the album, it just helps to, keep the album pacing just that little bit easier, I'd say. Despite it being so inaccessible in the first place, though. And so, onto the penultimate track, Weakling. And this one immediately starts with a repetitive bass structure that swings and bounces, tying together the screeching guitars and pounding percussive elements that we've got going on. And what I love on this track, which is another reason why this is one of my favourites here, you've got this sliding guitar, what I believe is both the guitar and the bass, that's just going up and down, and it fits so well within that really rigid industrial structure that they've presented thus far. It's easily one of my favourites, I think, and lyrically, another interesting one from Gira, as it seems to sort of explore this existential crisis that seems to come up a lot in, Gira's lyrics throughout the entire career, repeated statements of, this isn't real, not real. It comes up a lot, I feel, in Gira's lyrics, and, I'll try to keep an eye out for it, because I'm pretty sure it does anyway. I might be completely wrong, actually, but no, he definitely does explore existentialism, and yeah, it's interesting seeing the genesis of it on Filth here. We're going to see more of that in future episodes. It's going to be pretty cool. And so from there, we're on to the final track, Gang, the closer to the aggressive, filthy debut album from Swans that takes loud and ugly music to an absurdly chaotic, indulgent place. And I'm going to say, I think this is perhaps one of the most uncomfortable and aggressive tracks on the album. It features some incredibly disturbing imagery in its lyrics. And with its really slow pace that features those peculiar droning guitar chords from Westberg, it's a very interesting way to end the album that, it feels like you're kind of slowly falling out of consciousness after going through some brutal assault. And as you fade out, though, you just black out from the experience. So does the music. before you wake up and find yourself back in that exact same nightmare. You know, the aggression and the anger continuing to pummel you into submission. You know, I think it's a brilliant way to end this album, though. It ends on such an ugly, uncomfortable note, but I feel like that's the whole point. And so, yeah, that covers up like the main songs on this album. You know, just to sum up Filth in general, you know, I can see why they called this one Filth. You know, it is filthy. It's ugly and disgusting album, but that's what makes it really fascinating, though. It just grabs you by the neck, shakes you for 38 minutes, and by the end, you know, you just feel like you're gonna fall apart into a million pieces. And doing a bit of research on release, you know, Filth confounded some critics who couldn't get over the incredibly bleak and hopeless atmosphere, whilst other people found that very bleakness to be a part of the whole experience of the album itself. And the creation of the album itself is interesting. I did a bit of research about it, and it seems to stem from Gear's experiences in 1983 of living in New York City, which he described at the time of being in the throes of decay. The incredibly bleak environment became an important precursor for the unforgiving and brutal nature of Swans' music, as well as for the no-wave genre itself. And yeah, it's interesting that living in such an ugly, uncomfortable time, turned into something really creative and interesting. So just to talk a bit more about Filth, though, Filth has been re-released many times since 1983 when it was first released, and the edition I've been holding up today is the 2015 edition, comprised of 3 discs worth of material. Yeah, this is an incredibly. Let me just open up the 3 discs there. It's an incredibly, long and extensive collection on this thing that captures a lot of the band's earliest recordings, as well as the debut album Filth, of course. So, disc 1, you've got Filth, but it also ends with a bonus track of Live at the Kitchen NYC 1982-3, which is a 20-minute, bootleg, I think? It might be a legal bootleg kind of thing of one of Swans' earliest live recordings, so comprising of tracks from the band's first 2 albums and a bunch of other things, and it's a brutal lo-fi live recording that captures so much of that experience of what it was like to, listen to Swans in its earliest days. And man, it's a weird listen, though. It's so brutal and relentless, and it just assaults you again. It places us right back in the early 80s to that place they must have been at. Or it tries to, I was never around in the 80s, but whatever. And then on disc 2, though, we're also given the entire release of Body to Body, which was a 1991 compilation release that compiled many of the earliest recordings of the band between the years of 1982 to 85. And the experimental release, it helps further expand upon the history of the band at the time. It's very interesting. You're getting tape loops in there, some other songs, live recordings. It's a real insight to the creativity of the band in those very early years. And then disc 3, it's kind of doing a bunch of the same things as the other disc. It offers us the band's debut self-titled EP, Swans, alongside various live recordings. And yeah, the earliest recording, the Swans EP that basically started everything off for Swans. It's a really weird no-wave EP that's even very peculiar, even more peculiar than this, I would say, for its own reasons. But man, with 3 discs on this thing, you try to listen to the whole thing, you're just getting this overload of sonic assault, this brutalist noise rock. It showcases the infancy of a band who knew exactly what they wanted to sound like at the time. Loud, angry, and miserable as fuck. I have to say, it's a wonderful collection to own, and with the live recordings being, phenomenally interesting historical artifacts of the band in that place and time. So yeah, I'm really glad I have this one. It's very interesting, and what a way to start off your career, I've got to say. Well, sort of. What a way to start things off for Swans. It only gets more interesting from here, I feel. And so yeah, with with that, I think we're going to be coming to the end of today's episode of Weird Music. Yeah, we're like I said, we're going to try to cover all of the albums by Swans. Most likely in release order, I feel. And yeah, I just think it's going to be interesting because there is such a progression, in terms of the band's music, what they started off as and what they ended up as. And, such a wonderful lineup of musicians. We're going to get to know some very interesting people covering all these albums. But yeah, I just find their music so fascinating for that reason, And so in the next episode, we're going to be covering the follow-up to Filth, the 1984 album of Cop, which is another bleak and abrasive industrial album that further pushes everything to this miserable, angry world. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for that one if you enjoyed today's episode of Weird Music. If you have any suggestions for other episodes of Weird Music, though, feel free to pop them in the comments and I will try to get around to them if I can. For now, though, I'd like to thank you for watching today's episode. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye now.